was leaving Obama world. And, when you're making a career transition from working for the president, you really don't know what to do next. Like there's no like natural career path after something like that. And so I had a ton of conversations with people about, especially like what was going on beyond politics. I was pretty burned out. I'd had a career in the private sector for a long time that I enjoyed and wanted to go back to doing something that felt a little less crisis oriented. Maybe, if I mess something up, it's not like 100,000 people aren't going to get healthcare. That was the stakes I was working at before. And it was very, very stressful. It was not as great when I started working for Obama as when I stopped. So I wanted to talk to people about the kind of work I was interested in doing and seeing who was doing it. And the things that I was most interested in that really kind of lit my intellectual fire, like made me feel like we were doing really important work and was really challenging, was around transformation, like helping people wrap their heads around, we're still a little bit in the infancy of the internet. Business is constantly changing in response to technology and opportunity. But like when we look at the way business was structured, especially pre-pandemic, it hadn't really changed that much. Like we had kind of innovated around the edges, and you definitely saw some like up and coming companies doing some really interesting things, not only with technology, but rethinking their business model and how they approach their employees. And again, to your point about being radically conscious, their impact on the world, which is something that for a long time corporations didn't think about at all. Or if they did, they kind of paid other people in corporate social responsibility to think about it, right? I thought that was really like we were at this inflection point and no one was talking about how big of a moment it really was. And then, of course, I left Obama world. Trump was elected and the world became even more hyper politicized than it was before that. And so I felt this real urgency to be at that crux of digital disruption, social change, and the future of work. And that's one of the reasons why we founded 18 Coffees, to really be at that crux in terms of helping people navigate the new reality of all those things. And so we built a service model that was pretty forward thinking, I think, and really dealt with change in the way it looks now, not in the way that consultants and academics have been talking about change management for, decades, but in the way that it looks when you're in a constantly moving internet driven culture where people are kind of sitting at their screens, taking in their Twitter messages while they are taking in their Slack and Teams and their internal work culture, like how that stuff starts to bleed together. When you think about how often we have to respond to new data and we have to decide whether a new opportunity, whether it's a new social account or a new business model is viable for us, like there's just, we're at a place where doing change well requires almost a completely different skill set than it did 30 years ago. And so as we were building those service models and like creating IP for ourselves, I just started talking to people about that. And especially like reflecting on my work with Obama, like a lot of people started saying, oh, you should write a book about that. And always wanted to write a book, and the rest is history, I guess.
I always wanted you to write a book. So
well, I appreciate that.
And we met because I followed your Twitter account, I think, not even Obama's. So great content. So both the book and the company, great names, great titles. So maybe start with the company because it existed first and then go into the book. How did you come up with the titles?
Oh, man. So when you're building something and you're not quite sure what it's going to be yet, you've got a whole wide world of things that you can call it. And, we thought of things that were use our last names in creative ways, or that like had a history and me and my business partners work together, or do we do something completely off the wall and crazy and quirky and fun? And we went back and forth on this for a long time. And if you've ever named anything important, like a child or a company, you realize what an asinine exercise it is, and like how much your ego's tied up in it and how many opinions other people have. And finally, I think this was over chat one day, I was just like, look, it doesn't matter what we call it. We're going to have to build equity in the name. We're going to have to teach people what we do. Apple was a fruit company before Apple computers. You have to teach people, you have to teach the market. And so I was like, you just give me a number and I'm going to give you a flavor of ice cream. And if the URL is available, which is the most important part. We're just going to do it and we're not going to look back. And she's Chinese by origin. 18 is a lucky number in Chinese culture. I was on a coffee ice cream binge at the time, and we just said, fine, that's the name of our company. We'll figure out the rest later. And then we did. We iterated and created equity in the name and the brand, and the rest is history. But I don't want to disparage anyone who does naming for a living, because it's a super labor intensive, emotional thing that lots of people have to do. But I don't want to be in that industry. That was the company.
Well, sometimes it takes about 18 cups of coffee to get your mind around something, right? So it made sense to me. I don't know, but
well, that's what I'm saying. Now we get to be like, coffee is where you build trust. It's how you get energy. Like we can back into a really compelling corporate story instead of
growth,
we made it up. Yeah.
And it changes. Yeah. And okay. I love that. I actually thought maybe you had 18 coffees to get to the name, but now I have.
Yeah. I mean, we do both drink quite a bit of coffee every day, so it fits.
Amazing. And what about the book?
Yeah, the book was a little bit, so I was working with an agent. I was very, beneficial. I know lots of people write books and don't have agents, but having one for me was really, really helpful, because my brain is like all over the place about all kinds of different things. And she would really come back to me and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So can you dumb this down for me? And we iterated on the concept a lot until we got to a really simple idea, which is just like the idea that we can change and then stop changing is ridiculous. And that's the way that we have talked about change forever. And we have all these models about change management that are like, unfreeze the organization, do all these things, and then refreeze it. What are you talking about, man? Like, we are in a state of constant evolution, both as people and as organizations. And so just really nailing on that concept, which is no point B, like there's no end point. This is just how life is. This is just how we have to lead. And now I, make a living saying like, change leadership is leadership. Like that's just what leadership is. We thought that was a really succinct way to, put a bow on the whole concept of the book.
No, I love it.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Rhett.
I'm going to have to steal that, because I do change management, and I absolutely love that. So I will try to credit you when I want to sound brilliant. So
now I have to go set a Google alert up to see when you do that and see when Rhett goes to steal that concept.
Yeah.
Well, you borrow from the best, right?
That's
you just
right.
Borrow from. We all borrow from the best, right?
Honestly, is part of the intellectually taxing part of writing a book is trying to be like, what is original and what am I accidentally going to steal from someone else, right?
That's right. That's right.
Because you're like bringing in, you're doing all this curation work of other people's ideas. And I had so much anxiety that I'm going to steal something accidentally and not realize that I did it.
I know.
Yeah.
I actually did that into a plagiarism checker last night as I was thinking of something. I thought of a clever line for something I'm writing, and I put it in there just in case, because I thought it sounded really familiar. But anyway, it came up clean, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It sounds really familiar, so I don't know. So you talk a lot about being hyper-connected in the book, and how do you define hyperconnectivity? And I think I know, but I'd love to hear more about what you think. And what are some of the implications for living in a hyperconnected world?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I don't. There's been books that have come out, especially in the last 5-ish years, as we've looked at the negative implications of internet technology on our lives. And basically, some of the most radical ones are basically, we shouldn't do it. Like we should unplug. We shouldn't have social accounts. We should, it goes beyond digital detoxes to delete your social accounts or delete your, like basically go back to living in a cave, or, at least back to the 80s when we all had cassette tapes, like it's just, you get into this mindset of technology contrarianism. And I totally get the instinct of that, because I've been there. I've seen the kind of worst dregs of the internet. I I ran social media account for the first Black president. I saw some terrible stuff. Okay.
On Twitter.
Yeah, on Twitter. Exactly.
You sure you don't have PTSD from that?
That's what I'm saying. At least a lot more gray hair. But my argument that I make is that like the hyperconnectivity part is not going to go away, and we can't escape it, and we shouldn't try to escape it. We should manage it. I'm a big believer in digital detoxes. Don't get me wrong, but it's actually an abdication of the power and responsibility we've been given in such a hyperconnected world to constantly unplug and not lean in and use our voice and use the power that we've been given to do good. And so the argument that I make is like, not only is it unfathomable for us to be completely disconnected, and for some people, it's actually professionally risky and like can come with a lot of negative consequences to not lean in and be curious about how technology is changing our world. I mean, look at the impact of AI as we're having this conversation. Like if there's not a fire being lit under several different industries about what does this mean for us, of course you're going to get left behind, right? So like we don't really have a choice but to understand how technology is affecting our lives and our companies and how we should be leading them. But beyond that, I think it's actually, we have some responsibility built in as the most powerful, most connected, most technologically savvy society that ever has existed to say, what are we doing with that power? How are we using that to speak up about things that we need to speak up on, to change, not only, make our business models better and more effective and more profitable, but to my point earlier about being radically conscious, to use the data that we now have about our social impact to operate differently. And so I just think it goes beyond the hyper-connected in the mental health, sense. Yes, but also like we can manage those effects while having a positive impact.
It's so interesting because I think back on when I had my turning point in digital was actually one of your colleagues, I'm assuming, and the Obama campaign. And they said that people were dropping off when they went to donate at the like career question. And it was because students and people who were retired didn't have a career and they didn't know what to put.
Yeah.
And that they just put in parentheses student or retired. Okay. And and it just like changed everything. And what it sounds like to me, and please correct me wrong, is that the hyperconnectivity reduces our ability to sort of see the forest and the trees. And you're saying like, look at data points carefully. How do you slow down? How do you get your clients to slow down and then figure out what's the most important thing to look at?
Yeah. I mean, the example that you just gave is a great microcosm of the intersection between reporting requirements for campaigns and how we want things to be fast and easy on the internet. Like so much of our digital lives is built upon infrastructure that hasn't changed in decades, if not millennia. I mean, you think about democracy itself and like American democracy, how much has that been iterated upon in the last 200 years, right? And the pace of change happening right now that democracy is supposed to help regulate is dizzying. So we don't have like campaign electoral reporting requirements that acknowledge that some people don't have one career. Some people don't have any careers, like to your point about retirees anymore. But like, I'm a multifaceted person who runs multiple companies, does multiple things. Like I stress out about that when my doctor asks what my career is going to be, much less when the SEC is doing it because they want like reporting requirements, right? So no wonder people are dropping off. But I think that for myself and for my own clients, I think this is one of the reasons why I focus so much on changing well, is because it's not just about reacting to the environment that we have. Like that's a great example of like, we need to figure out what to do today. Like we've got these reporting requirements. We've got an end date for this campaign. We're just going to have to build something that acknowledges that we only have a 6-month-ish runway and make do with it. Right. But actually changing well means looking across multiple horizons and saying, where can we make structural change for the long term while dealing with what we have right in front of us, because we're always doing both, right? Like we're making decisions that have long-term consequences at the same time as we're putting out the fires of today. And changing well means just acknowledging that reality and constantly be looking across those horizons and being okay with the tension of we don't actually know. Like the longer we look across, the less we know about what's actually going to happen. And we're doing some forecasting, and sometimes we're not great at forecasting, but we kind of have to do it. And what we're going to do today is do the things that are most valuable for today.
Well, I got so many questions here, and a couple of them don't have or aren't part of the book, but I mean, this idea of
not allowed. It has to be
not allowed. Darn it.
Could you change the format, Rhett?
Darn it. But like you said, like this information we talked about, you were hinting on this a little bit ago about a responsibility to try to do good and not to disconnect, but to engage maybe. I mean, how do you deal with overload here? Because I think I do see a lot of that. I mean, whether it's, I'm here at a tech conference this week and people just sort of overloaded with AI and all these things that you have to try to keep up with now as a business owner, as an individual, like, and we are at a stage where a lot of people just feel that overload. There is that.
Yeah. How could you not?
And the other side of the question for me is, that's led to, I think it's one of the contributing factors to this tension that we have in society politically and everything else, right? I think social media and is partly responsible for that. I don't know I don't know really what the question is, if it's not more than a statement, but how do we deal with that? How do we process that as people? How do we navigate that overload, I guess, is the question, and remain positive and engage positively? Because I think it is up to each of us individually to try to take it down a notch. Right?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I framed it in the book is to find the context again for yourself. Because there's a real good chance that you either get lost. I'm going to steal to your point about attribution. I stole this from Kierkegaard. You either get lost in the infinite, which means that in the infinite amount of possibilities, we do nothing. Or you get lost in the finite, which means we know we can control this, and that's all we're going to worry about. We're not going to worry about any of the rest. And actually, the truth lies somewhere in the middle of we have to deal with what we know and is provable, and we can, and we know we can have an impact on, while considering the things that we don't know, and be constantly reevaluating how the world is changing, taking in new data points. And again, about changing well, like adjusting strategy when that data says that we should adjust. And again, looking across multiple horizons. So we're even looking for data points from the right horizon to make those kinds of decisions. But it can be like decision paralysis is probably the thing that we deal with the most from an organization, because that is a very paralyzing thing. And we feel it in our everyday lives in terms of dealing with the negative information that is coming out about how broken the world is every single day. The negativity in the media is like amplified by social media, which only talks about all the ways the world is broken, right? You have to go find the good news. This is one of the things that lots of people that I've mentored is like, to manage your own mental health, you have to actually build information streams about the good news too, right? Like go out and find the outlets that are talking about the things that you care about. So you hear about where we're making progress, and you're not just looking at the national media standpoint, which is almost always about how the world is broken. So that's
my clients. I mean, the clients though, they are scared to death to put anything out there now.
Right.
Right.
You mean like from a standpoint, because like they're worried they're going to get called out? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, right. They've got that decision paralysis about whatever campaign they're rolling out, whatever they're, who's it going to offend, who's, how are we going to get canceled on the, it is
for good reason. We've had Bud Light, we've had Target, like just in the last few weeks, in terms of people who tried to make a move, got called out, calling back, and we could argue about whether or not pulling back on those campaigns was a good move or not. I definitely have opinions on that, but it can be very paralyzing to feel like we can't make mistakes. And in reality, most of the time you can make mistakes. let's just talk purely about the comm standpoint. Again, I ran social media for a president. I'm very aware of the risks of saying the wrong thing. I've spent many a night worrying about Josh Earnest being asked about something that we tweeted at a press briefing. Like that was the world that I lived in. But in reality, even the president throws 1,000 punches of social media content, throws 1,000 punches of talking about all kinds of different issues, and doesn't always get it right. Doesn't always get it exactly nuanced in terms of the policy issue, doesn't always get it exactly right in terms of who, like when thinking about the constituencies, like you want to talk about a complex constituency base. We had Capitol Hill, we had our voters, we had people who didn't vote for us, we had people who were going to be upset at us no matter what we said. We had, like there was always risk in terms of that environment. And so we didn't always get it right. And for the most part, as long as you are trying, and when you have a crisis, you are overcorrecting and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do differently, people will actually give you some leeway to try things and make mistakes. Mm-hmm. Now, there are exceptions to this rule. It kind of depends on what you're stepping in and how bad of a mistake that you made, of course, and whose ultimate responsibility it was. But that paralyzing feeling of I can't do anything because I'm going to get something wrong is actually just not true. And the more that we can fight against that anxiety and just try and learn, like some of that is just we are like there's a mental block that we have to learning new things about ourselves and like how to do things. And some of that is you learn by trying. Like there's just no other way to do it.
And you just keep moving. And you just keep moving. You just keep moving.
Yeah, you do your best, but once you know better, you do better. That's what I brought that quote up a lot in my book from Maya Angelou. It says like God, now I'm gonna butcher the quote. It was like when I knew better, I did better. That was the essential. Totally like just butchered Maya Angelou quote. Now, speaking of get it wrong on the internet.
But then it goes back to, so, I've run social media accounts my entire career, never for a president, but maybe I'm more risk adverse than you. And I found that when you know why you're there, the idea of communicating goes away completely. It's almost like invisible. It's like, it's like you're so connected to the thing that the process of communicating it's this effortlessness.
Right.
And when it's not effortless, it's usually because you don't have an opinion. And you can misquote Maya Angelou if you want to, as long as everyone knows why you're saying it in the first place. But if you go out there and you do it and they're like, why did you say that?
Because it's Black History Month. No.
Yeah, exactly. No. Exactly. How do you get people to just stop for a second and figure out why they're there in the first place?
I mean, you were talking about the foundational work that so few companies have done to actually figure out what they value. Because if we're going to operate in a highly politicized environment, then we need to operate from principles, not from politics. If we react to the political environment, we've seen so many examples of this just in the last year. When we react to the political environment, we show ourselves as wishy-washy, like we don't believe in anything, we don't stand for anything. We get seen as this like corporate boardroom driven nonsense where we'll just say anything to make a profit. And people just won't put up with that. I mean, that's part of operating in that radically conscious environment, is that people call bullshit on that all the time. And so if we can stop and do the foundational work of saying, what do we value? Then we can operate from principle instead of operating based on the fires that we have to put out that day. And it's going to be hard. Don't get me wrong. Operating from principle is still very hard when we feel like we are being more risky by saying what we believe. But people will respect you for it. And over the long run, this is the important part. Over the long run, you might have social media fires in the short term, Usually those burn out without much effect on the bottom line. And over the long run, you're going to gain fans. You're going to gain respect for your brand. It's tough to say. It's like there's like an opportunity cost there, right? Like you don't feel like we need to do this kind of foundational work until you don't know what you believe or what you should say in a specific situation. Or you've done that foundational work and it's at such a high level, you have no idea how it applies to any given situation. So like I've seen tons of companies are like, inclusion is one of our values. Okay, great. How does inclusion operate in this environment when you are trying to make a market-based decision about which customers you're going to target and which you are not? How does inclusion operate when that exclusionary decision actually negatively affects people who aren't your customers? Are you just talking about inclusion when it comes to your customers? Or are you talking about the rest of that community too? You know, like if you start like actually scenario planning it around there, you can get to the teeth of where those values are going to, like the rubber's going to hit the road on what you believe pretty fast. But we don't do that kind of foundational work that helps us react to things better from a more like, values driven place.
Mm-hmm. No, I always, in a lot of my work that I do with companies, it's really about those values are, and I say the same kind of stuff that you're talking about, which is, in tough times, your values actually, if you're a values driven organization, your values actually make those decisions pretty easy.
Yes. Right.
Right. I mean, in tough times when you have
in the hard moments because you did all that work already. Right.
And the answer is clear typically when you have a tough decision to make, if you're a values driven organization. Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And so I hate to, we have to sort of get to the end here, and I hate that, but what do you hope, what are the key points? Let's summarize this nicely. What are the key points and key takeaways for No Point B? Like, let's get to that.
So, to summarize this, a very complicated topic. Let's be honest, in a very short book, which is probably was one of the reasons why I'm very happy my agent was so patient with trying to come up with the concept. But if I was to summarize in a couple points, it's that we can't change the way that we have changed. Like we have to actually think about what's different about how we do change right now than how we have done it over the last 50 years of business cycle. Like we are entering a new era, more anxiety, more information, more decision fatigue. Like what are we going to do differently about how we transform our organization now? And specifically, what is the role of leaders to do that? The whole book is targeted at leaders of the future that are connected, that are radically conscious. And how does leadership for those people in that environment look different? And specifically, there's a call to action at the end that is about having agency over making that change, no matter what level of leadership you find yourself in. And this is an important point that I always make, which is that we all have more agency than we realize, whether that's making change in society, using our voice politically, or it's being in an environment, in a bureaucracy, in a larger organization, seeing something wrong and speaking up about it. And not just speaking up about it, but like taking leadership, that as a leadership opportunity and trying to change your company, trying to change those economic levers to be like slightly more just is, I think, worthwhile work. And, if we can find that context for us again and find work that is meaningful like that, it makes a world of difference to our experience of work. It makes a world of difference. And collectively, if we all can do that, it's going to make a world of difference to building a more inclusive, more, circular economy that we are going to have to build over the next 20, 30 years.
Thank you thank you for being here. I've seen you speak and I've seen your work and I've seen you build a company, and now having the book and being on the show and sharing this with everyone. It's really powerful. So, and where can we get the book?
Yes, you can get it at wherever books are sold. All the links I have on calebgardner.com will take you to, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I particularly like Bookshop or IndieBound, of course, for the like little guys, but you can really get it anywhere. So that it's pretty easily accessible.
Caleb, thank you. This is fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, of course. And for everyone watching, this is Bestseller TV. We'll be back next week with another episode. And thank you, of course, Rhett, as always.